everyone. Welcome to our brand raising webinar. This is Lisa Colton. I'm the Chief Learning Officer at C3 Communications. And we're thrilled to be bringing this topic and my good friend and brand raising expert, Farah from Big Duck, to share her expertise and insights with you. We have collaborated on many projects in the past. Over the last few years, we've done a collaborative project with a group of private schools and helping them increase their branding through social media and their fundraising and outreach and recruitment efforts. So Farah, it's fantastic to be back with you to do this webinar together.
Always a pleasure.
Mine as well. Just a few words about our webinar today. You can use the hashtag Brandraising, and we'll be following the conversation on Twitter. If you want to be asking any questions through the webinar, you'll see on your control panel, there's a tab for questions. I will be managing that and surfacing questions for Farah at a few different points throughout our conversation today. There's also a chat feature, so if you want to chat anything into us or respond to any of the challenges or questions that Farah puts forth, you're welcome to use that too. And Shaylee, yep, I saw your question. It is working. You're in the exact right spot. Just a couple words about C3. We are an organization that works with nonprofits and social causes, really helping people to change the world. So we believe that your mission can be activated and amplified through great use of technology and communications, including websites, apps, video, social media, and all sorts of awareness, recruitment, and fundraising campaigns as well. And I'll let Farah tell us a little bit about her work at Big Duck. Farah is the vice president at Big Duck, a firm based in Brooklyn, New York. And brand raising is one of many of the things that they are specifically good at. And Farah, I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. It is always great to be working with you and the C3 crew. Welcome, everybody. In case we have not had the pleasure to meet, this is what I look like. If you want to connect with us on Twitter, as Lisa mentioned, please use the hashtag Brandraising. I also tweet at Farah, and I'm often the woman behind the scenes of the @BigDuck account. As Lisa mentioned, I am the vice president at Big Duck. Big Duck is a communications firm that works exclusively with nonprofits. We actually have a very similar mission to the folks at C3, and our focus is really on how we can use things like branding, campaigns, and overall consulting to build the skills of organizations to help them reach their donors, connect with participants, recruit participants, build relationships with alumni, etc. And of course, raise money. That comes up a fair bit too. So this is what our office looks like. Should you ever find yourselves in Brooklyn, come on by, and we're going to get started. So what we're going to talk about today are three big topics. What can branding do for you? What is brand raising, which is Big Duck's approach to branding? And what kind of results can you expect if you wind up making significant changes to your brand? As Lisa mentioned, please feel free to chat in questions or comments through the chat or question function as we go, and she'll send them my way. And I will certainly pause and ask you some questions as we go. And in fact, I'm going to ask you one right now, which is, I'm going to take a guess that the brands on this screen look familiar to you and that you probably know most or all of them. And my question is, why? Why do you think that that the over 50 people that are on this webinar right now, 50 plus folks, everybody probably knows every single one of the brands on the screen. So chat in your thought, and Lisa will mention to me what she's seeing. Why do we know these brands? So chat in your response or submit it as a question, and Lisa will read some of the responses out loud. Why are these so familiar?
Sarah says advertising, saturation of the images, things that are heavily promoted. Ooh, Barb says they're simple and visual. I really like that one. They're ubiquitous everywhere, see them in a lot of different media. That's a great comment, David.
Mm-hmm. So the thing about, the fact that they're ubiquitous and we see them in a lot of media, when we are seeing them in a lot of media or we're seeing them everywhere, are they changing? If I go to Target in Chicago versus Target in Brooklyn or Target in I don't know, where else is Target? Omaha. Is the color of that bullseye going to be anything but red? Am I going to have a different experience when I go through the store? Probably not, right? There's a temptation that we have often with our organizations to reinvent ourselves. And one of the things that these organizations do is once they define who they are, they keep it consistent. And yes, of course, they do certainly have bigger advertising budgets to be seen. Let's flip the script for a moment. Here are some nonprofit, pretty popular brands that I'm guessing you know a lot about. So chat in again here. Why do you know these guys? Of the ones that you recognize on this screen, why are they familiar to you? And they may be the same responses you had for our friends at Target and FedEx and McDonald's, or they may be different. So Lisa, let's see what you get.
Yep. First response is consistency.
Mm-hmm.
I like this one, Joan, that they explain who they are. There's more mission kind of embedded in these ones.
Right. Some of these, whether it's in their name or in their tagline or even the iconography they use with their logo.
Michaela says WWF refreshed or tweaked their logo instead of totally redesigning it. So there's some consistency even when they redesigned. The icon matches the mission.
And I think what's interesting about the WWF logo that came up in a recent conversation that I had with someone was, they do more than just help pandas, right? But they've picked the panda in this case as an icon to represent who they are. And I think that can be a challenge that we often see when organizations are trying, whether they're working with us or they're on their own, trying to figure out the right mark. If they decide to do a logo with a mark, and not all logos have marks, Teach for America, for example, is just typography. Do Something is sort of integrated in a symbol, but it's not a separate mark. But, WWF, Red Cross, March of Dimes, for example, on the screen, they all have a mark. And this, again, the thing about WWF, they don't just do pandas, but that is a way to bring you in and help you understand their work. And they don't see the logo as having to do everything. In this case, it's just bringing you in to get you to understand what they're about. So why should nonprofits, think about or care about branding? Well, this is obviously popular in the for-profit world. Well, why should nonprofits care? We believe that branding, communications, all of that should be in service of an organization's mission. And when we're thinking about your mission and why you should communicate, typically it breaks down into these three reasons: raising money, recruiting participants for programs, or engaging people in programs, or changing hearts and minds or policies, right? So fundraising, programs, advocacy. And when you're doing a specific campaign, you might be focusing on one of these circles. Let's say many of you probably are wrapping up your year-end fundraising campaigns and hopefully sending out your celebration messages of how much you raised and met your goals. But your brand actually has to do some lifting on all of these things, right? Your brand is telling the whole story of your organization. It may be that your parts of your brand need to emphasize or need to really appeal to a certain audience. For example, maybe your brand has to do some heavier lifting with your donors than it does your clients, or vice versa. But it's important to remember that the reason why we communicate is first to advance our mission, but then second to really tap into these goals. Now, communications have changed. You may remember the days of yore when we didn't have as many communications channels to worry about. But these days, with these days, I mean, over the past decade or two, not only have we seen email take off, but you've got websites, millions of social media channels, video, apps, all the things Lisa was talking about how C3 specializes in. There are so many different communications vehicles that we can use to get our message out there, but also the person we're trying to reach is inundated on them. And one of our best chances of cutting through the noise and that clutter is actually being clear, compelling, and consistent. And we think taking a strategic approach to your brand can help your organization actually reach that person you're trying to build a relationship with or keep a relationship with. Another reason why we think you should care about branding is simply budget. Many people, when I'm, showing things like the big for-profit logos and they're thinking about advertising campaigns, but we don't have the money, right? We can't spend the money that Old Navy can on an ad campaign or something. That's true, right? Most nonprofits don't have a huge budget for communications or outreach. But actually, when you really think about your brand and you become consistent and clear and compelling, you can save money. You create templates, you create a set of key messages everyone can refer to. So actually investing in branding at first certainly may take some funds, but if you do it well, it can save money over the long term. Finally, one of the main reasons why organizations should care, why nonprofits should think about and care about branding is to get everybody speaking from the same songbook. One exercise you can try at your next staff meeting is just get everybody to go around the room and explain your organization. Or if you're worried they may say, well, what she said, have them write down a sentence on an index card or a piece of paper and turn it into you. My guess is many people will highlight similar but different things. They might highlight what they know, their program, their focus, or they may speak about something just from a different perspective. Most of us are representing our organizations in fragmented ways, and when we can get everybody to represent the organization in the same way, our audience can get a better sense of who we are and what we do. So I'm going to do a pop quiz, and I want you to chat in your response to Lisa. How many nonprofit organizations materials is this? This is an example of what you might see in my office on a given day. Lots of communications materials out on the table. How many organizations are we looking at here? So chat in your responses to Lisa.
3, 45, 1, 13.
We'll go for 18. So the answer is 1. Of course, the person who answered that possibly knew this was a setup. One of the first things that we do when we're assessing an organization's brand, and this is easily something, again, you can do it with your organization, something to try at home, is take the past year or two worth of communications materials you've sent out, direct mail pieces, annual report, gala invitations, printouts of emails you've sent out, maybe a copy of your Facebook page or Twitter account, a snapshot of your recent video. Put them out on the table and say, okay, well, how many organizations does this look like? Now, the good news is your donor, your program participant, your activist, your board member, they're probably not keeping all of these materials out in one corner of their house or apartment and looking at them from time to time. Let's hope they are, but chances are they're not. But if this is a story that you're telling when we put it all together, it's going to be, again, hard for anybody to know what you're about. These are materials from a social service agency that we worked with a few years ago that was a huge organization, and every department felt like they had to communicate in their own way to so when they were communicating to their major donors, they felt like things had to be in their way, more elegant, more formal. When they were communicating to the community, it had to feel more grassrootsy, and let's make a photocopy and use Comic Sans. When we're, talking to funders, we're going to use a report and be very jargony. And it just felt like it was, 3 to 43, whatever those responses were, organizations. And it just, when it is such a noisy world out there, it can be hard for anybody to understand what you're about if everything they're seeing about you is different. Now, I'm going to show you some examples of another brand you may be familiar with. This one, Coca-Cola. And Coca-Cola has been around for a long time, and they certainly have, revised their product. I remember the days of New Coke and Classic Coke over the years. But when we see how they communicate across channels, it doesn't necessarily feel like it's that different. So this is a sign from way back when. And here's an example of their website from a few days ago. Right now, if we look at the Coca-Cola type treatment, that's actually stayed the same. Color red for them has stayed the same. But what they've brought in, the different communications channels they're using, obviously have modified how they're integrating social media here, their Facebook page. Their campaign now is about happiness, but it might be about giving the world a Coke, right, and teaching them all to sing. There's different things that they do over the time, different things that they're playing up. They're tying their product into the moment that the audience cares about here in terms of New Year's, but it still feels like it's Coca-Cola, that if I was to see this anywhere, I would know it's them. And most obviously, of course, is color and type treatment, but even if we were to read a lot of their messaging, it would still feel like the same organization. All right, next question I'm going to ask you all out there. I'm going to show you something for a second, and I want you to chat in what organization it is. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the slide. So send to Lisa what organization I just showed you.
Oh, I
Not
have like
Coca-Cola.
14 accurate responses.
Okay.
All
So
from
Lisa,
women, interestingly. No, no, no. There's one man in there.
there you go. So Lisa, tell us who this is.
Tiffany and Company.
Right. Now, I unfortunately have never received a present from Tiffany's. If any of you want to send me one, you can. I'd gladly take it. But we all know that Tiffany's has the blue box. There's something about that, and they haven't strayed from that. Now, I'm not saying you have to keep your brand and you can't ever change it, but once you lock in on something that works and that really tells your story well, keeping it consistent in some way is important. Of course, if what you have out there doesn't work, changing it needs to happen, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So before I leave this section, I just want to wrap up. Why do organizations care about branding? Why do they think about it? Well, Big Duck actually earlier last year, we did a study where we reached out. We worked with an independent research company called FDR. We sent a survey out, and over 350 nonprofits responded. And we published these results in something called the rebrand effect, which I'll talk a little bit more about later in today's conversation. But one of the questions we said is, why did you rebrand? If organizations answered, yes, we changed our brand in the past few years, we said why. Most people, not surprisingly, did it to explain their work better. Time after time, we often hear people sort of looking at branding from the question of, people don't understand what we do, we don't have a story to tell, we hear all this about, we need to know what our story is, we don't know what. We are explaining the story the same way, but people still don't understand it. A lot of organizations wind up speaking from their programs and not from the whole. So we're seeing a lot of people rebrand really just to get a better sense of how to explain what they do, but also many of them do it to raise money and to really recruit more people. So if any of you have gone through a branding process recently, I'd love you to chat into Lisa why you rebranded. But I'm going to keep going, and we'll see if that comes out. So what does rebranding include? There are lots of ways to define elements of branding and what you should think about with branding. And what I'm going to do is share with you our approach as one example. So several years ago, Big Duck created a model to branding that we call Brandraising. And the idea of Brandraising is that you're branding not just for branding's sake. You're branding to really help increase visibility, create change, recruit participants, right? All those things I talked about earlier. And the other thing that's different about our approach to branding, and a lot of it overlaps maybe in a for-profit world too, but is that we're thinking about branding as stemming from your strategic plan. Most of you hopefully have a strategic plan. It may be that it's sitting in a binder and no one's looked at it in a while, or that it's out of date, or it's just in someone's head. But most of us are operating with a strategic plan and a clear path forward. And if we understand, that's where branding starts. You have to understand what your vision is, what you're trying to do for the world, what your mission is to get that done, what beliefs guide you. And from there you get into what we consider brand strategy, which is positioning and personality, which I'm going to spend a minute talking about. What we often see people do when it comes to branding is go right into the look and feel. Well, what's our logo? What colors do we use? What's our name and tagline? We label that at the identity level, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that shortly. We think before you can answer the question about whether or not that's the right logo or color or messaging, or even how your website's working or how you're using social media, whether you should do video differently, you need to really start with understanding who you are at the organizational level. So branding typically is the best time to do branding is after a strategic planning process, or while one is sort of at least halfway through. If that's not possible, you can still certainly analyze your brand, but if your organization is about to rethink and change where it's going, you don't want to, you want to wait till that happens before you take any kind of changes to your brand. So we believe that at the heart of branding, the real strategy for your brand lies with concepts we label as positioning and personality. Positioning is the big idea you want people to associate with you. It's what comes to mind when they see your name, see your logo, get an email from you, see you pop up on Twitter, get your video, whatever it may be, and also what sets you apart. There are lots of organizations typically competing for the same donor, program participant, advocate as you are in your space. So how should they think about you differently? Again, how do we stand out in the sea of many? So another opportunity for chatting in. Chat in to Lisa. What phrase, as soon as you see the red cross, what phrase comes to mind? What word, 2 or 3 words, come to mind when you see a red cross? And we'll see what kind of answers we get.
Emergency, first aid,
Mm-hmm.
help, support, blood donation, emergency relief, aid. Big budget. Disaster relief. Great.
Uh-huh.
Falls in a few categories, but a lot of consistency here.
Yeah, and I didn't just put the slide together in the moment. This was put together before today's conversation. Most of the times when I ask that question in a room of hundreds, most people circle around this idea of disaster emergency relief or blood donations. And I think that's exactly what we saw in the responses that were chatted in. The Red Cross has been around for a long time, but there are many things they do, but when an emergency happens, we think of the Red Cross as the place to go to. They own that position in our brains as one of the premier, response organizations when there is a disaster. What's the idea that should come to mind for your organization? What makes you different? What is a space that you can claim in people's brains that no one else can? That's positioning. One of my colleagues that Lisa also knows, Liz, our director of strategy, describes positioning in the way that, say you were to go on a job interview, which I'm sure none of you are in the near future, but let's say you were to go on a job interview. You'd go into that job thinking, I am the best person for this job. They'd be crazy not to hire me, right? You go in there confident and all sort of boost up, and you've thought about why you should be hired and why you're a fit. If you were to say that, if you were to say you'd be crazy not to hire me, I'm the best person for this job, you'd probably come across as a bit arrogant, and they may not hire you. But if you do your job well, if everything about you, your resume, your cover letter, your outfits, your conversation, your follow-up shows that you really understand you're the best person for this job, then you're likely to get hired. If that hopefully makes sense, that's positioning. Positioning is the kind of thing that it just sort of comes out of everything that you do. It is clear from every way that you communicate that this is the idea of what you're about. Now, sometimes you see it literally spelled out in an organization's tagline or in their mission statements, but other times it just comes across everything that they do. So that, in a brief phrase, is the idea of positioning. And then we pair that with personality. Personality, if positioning sort of occupies the space in the person's brain that we hope to have, I like to think personality occupies the heart, right? It's the feelings that people might associate with our organization, and then the tone and style we use across our copy, across our graphics, across anything we put together. This is an image of an ad campaign you may remember from several years ago. It feels so dated to me now, but our friends Mac and PC. This was a campaign done by Apple, and clearly, what adjectives did they want you to associate with PC? So chat those into Lisa. And then you just chat in PC colon an adjective and then Mac colon an adjective. What did they want us to think about Mac and PC?
Not hip, outdated, nerd, old-fashioned, stiff, frumpy,
And what about Mac?
square.
What did they want us to think about Mac?
Mac is cool, hip, easy. Ooh, I like that. Fun,
Mm-hmm.
young, fresh, new, hot, current, relaxed.
Right. So now, and when you go into an Apple store or you have an Apple product, I mean, you want that. You want to be seen as cool, and they obviously Mac wants you to think that you can reach them and they're easy, and you're going to be creative by using their products. That is one way to think about personality. Now, let me bring that a little bit to the nonprofit space. These 3 organizations here, ASPCA, Humane Society, and PETA, what do they have in common? Chat into Lisa the thing that connects these 3 organizations. Hopefully you know at least one of them. What connects these 3 groups? What do they share in common?
Animals, animal rights, care for animals, kindness, animal
Right.
welfare, safety, protection.
Exactly. They all have the same mission, generally speaking, right? They're all about fighting cruelty to animals. or maybe we can say this, they share the same vision of a world where people are not cruel and abusive to animals, right? They have a similar space. But the way they do it programmatically, but also not just programmatically, but the feelings we might associate with them are different. So, for example, the ASPCA, who are the ones behind those Sarah McLachlan commercials, or I think that they may have a new commercial series out now, is a little bit different than PETA, who may be known as throwing paints on people who wear fur, right? So ASPCA may have a sort of friendly, warm vibe. Humane Society is very focused on advocacy, and they may be considered as very grassroots. And PETA, there are lots of descriptions I often hear for PETA: edgy, militant, right, assertive, aggressive. But they have a different way of expressing themselves. And the thing that helps your donor, and there may be a donor out there or a advocate who supports all of these, right? Their mission in life is to fight cruelty to animals, and they may be a member of each of these communities, or they may more closely identify with the feelings of one over the other. Understanding that feeling you want people to associate with you, and then using that to guide your copy, to guide the colors you use, to guide what and where you communicate can be very powerful. So I'm going to show you a quick example of two different campaigns, and from these types of organizations, and I want you to tell me which organization you think it is. So this is the first campaign. This is a holiday campaign that is concerned about pets being kept in puppy mills. Chat in. This is just an image I grabbed from a website, from one of these organizations, a campaign website. Chat in who you think this is, or who you think it isn't. What does this feel like, from ASPCA, Humane Society, or PETA?
Answers are all over the place.
Or if there's a not answer, or what are you seeing, Lisa?
I'm seeing Humane Society, ? ASPCA, PETA, not PETA. Humane Society, not PETA, PETA or Humane. I mean, really all over the place.
Okay. So the people who said not PETA, chat into Lisa why you said not PETA.
It's not as graphic or loud
anyone
or
else
extreme.
thinks it's not PETA.
Yeah. It's not about eating or fur. The dogs actually look reasonably happy and healthy. It's not edgy enough.
So this is ASPCA campaign. Let me show you another one, and then we'll have another discussion. This is another campaign. Who do we think this is?
PETA, 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 PETA.
Right. No question about it. And that's one of the things that I find fascinating about PETA. When I use them as an example in conversation, people have a reaction to PETA. It definitely provokes more, but there's also a clarity about their branding. This campaign has been around for a few years. This campaign they have targeting McDonald's. The first time someone sent it to me, I mean, even on their website, here I've blocked out where they say PETA, and I think I notice it now somewhere else on the page. But when you go to the home page of the website, this is an inner page. PETA, the name PETA is in the footer. You don't even need to, this is PETA. Like, there is no question that this campaign, because of the color, because of the graphics, even as people said, like the approach to the images, here we're seeing, like, I'm probably going to have to move on soon because it's too much for me, right? We're seeing like kind of cool pictures of chickens, whereas as opposed to cute puppies and kittens, which we might more likely see with the ASPCA or even Humane Society. Like, it is PETA. Now, that doesn't mean your brand has to go extreme in this way, but if there was a way you could go focused on something, that's one of the reasons why when we help organizations think about brand personality, when they say things like expert, professional, innovative, we always push back. You want to come up with adjectives that are so clear and crisp that bring a picture to mind. My sort of suggestion here is, imagine you're setting somebody up on a date. You're not going to say, oh, you should go out with this person. They're nice and interesting, right? You want to set up a picture of who this person is. They're adventurous, risk-taking, courageous, whatever it may be about them that's going to be, oh, wow, I really want to meet that person. You want to use personality adjectives and understand what should be associated with you in a way that you can use it to make decisions. A good set of personality words will help you say, okay, is this color palette, logo, is it this enough? Is it bold enough, fierce enough, motivating enough? Or maybe we're academic and soft and warm and fuzzy, right? Whatever those kind of things are, and use that to really determine what your brand should be. I like to think about positioning and personality as things that should have a foot in both the actual and the aspirational, right? You have to authentically, you can't just want to be something that you could never be. You can't just say, well, our personality, we really want people to think that we are cutting edge and risk taking, but you're an academic institution that has to look, is very evidence-based, and there's just no way that you could ever own that positioning or personality. You want to come up with an idea and a feeling that is something that can grow from where you are, but it certainly is okay to be aspirational if it's the right place that you should be going. And once you're clear about this is the idea we want people to associate with us and this is the feeling, then you can use those tools to decide, do we need to change our visual identity, our messaging, our website, et cetera? Or how can we use these so that the next speech we give or brochure we put out really pass the test?
Hey, Farah, this is Lisa. Can I just add a comment? I was really
Yeah.
struck by in the last slide where you said, PETA's name isn't even on this, yet everybody knew exactly who it was and what it was. And what I want to add is that we're seeing a really big shift in Gen Xers, especially millennials, about less allegiance to institutions and more commitment to cause. And
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to punctuate that as it relates to this kind of branding, specificity, consistency, because PETA is so good at this and so specific and radical in some way that they don't even have to put their name all over it. And it grabs people because it is completely speaking about the cause and about their mission, not about them necessarily as an institution. But they know once they get your attention because you're committed to that cause, you're ultimately going to come back to them as an organization and support what they're doing, whether it's money or advocacy or whatever else. And so I just want to encourage people to think about their branding as it relates to their cause, not only about promoting your organization as an institution, because different generations are going to react to that really differently, some of them with a little bit of defensiveness.
Yeah, I mean, we could spend the rest of the time talking about this, but I'll try not to. There is a lot of research out there about millennials in particular. Exactly, I've seen many of the same things you're raising, Lisa, that they are much more connected to the cause and less likely to be brand loyal. What I see a lot of organizations struggling with now is they sort of most of their donor file, for example, their direct mail list, maybe even some of their email list is boomers or other mature seniors, and they're worried about how do we engage this new generation, the millennials, et cetera, and start building relationships with them, but not lose or alienate people that have been on our file or that we've known for 20 years, if they're an organization that's been around for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the thing that I would say overall, and we're not necessarily going to get into it today, is being audience-centric. And really, however you decide what the big idea is that should be connected to your organization, speaking about your audience and to your audience and not at them. Using words like you and thinking about how the audience matters and less about us as an organization is definitely important. And that's something we speak a lot about, particularly in our fundraising work. But let me not segue too much further, but that was a good point. So once we're clear about our brand strategy, again, that positioning and personality, we can then really look at our current identity level, our visual identity and our messaging, and decide what's working, what isn't. So visual identity includes things like your logo, the colors you use. Some organizations have a primary color palette and a secondary one. So that primary color palette is their logo and most of what you see, but there are a secondary palette they use to accentuate different ideas or maybe associated with certain areas. Typography or fonts A lot of organizations have a font that they use when they are maybe for their logo and on certain communications, and then they have a font that they use for digital that they know is going to be across um, all programs. And the thing about typography and colors, I certainly know I have the benefit of working and living with a designer actually, but also working with many graphic designers. And the choices that people can make and infer with colors and typography are wide. And this is why when you know the positioning and personality ahead of time, they're tools that let us, not only do they let creative folks make decisions, but they can help us when we are working with our staff or our board, so that people just resist the idea of, I don't like this. I don't like green anymore, so let's change our logo from green. Or I don't think, we should use X because we're all about, people, so let's make sure we have a stick figure of a person. When you are clear about your positioning and personality, you can use tools to say, well, remember, we wanted to communicate that we were feisty and angsty. And right now, this muted color palette isn't really doing that. It's too relaxing. So that gives people a sort of way to think about how they should change these things. The other part of visual identity is imagery. Actually thinking about, do we use photos or graphics? Do we use photos of real people that we've gotten permission to use? Do we use stock? What kind of angles do we use candid, things that look candid and people showing a certain emotion? Do we use close-ups? Do we go far away? Figuring out how and your approach to imagery, and then again being consistent about that, can all be part of how people can really understand what you're about. Now on the flip side, there's messaging. We got the words, and we got the colors and the feelings and the look, and now we've got the words here. So obviously your name, that is perhaps the biggest. Your name, logo, and tagline, those three things are really your core identity. And those three things, your name, logo, and tagline, are the most widely traveled ambassadors of your brand. Those three things together really have to be showcasing that positioning and personality. And we often see personality guiding sort of the logo and color choices, and the tagline, name and tagline combination is often where the positioning comes out, part of what can help, again, connect an idea with you and set you apart. If your name, the name of your organization is very straightforward, you might need a tagline to have a call to action or add a little emotion to what you do. If your name is kind of murky, you might need a tagline that's very straightforward and explains what you're about. There's lots of different ways you can think about names and taglines. Some organizations can't change their name because it's based on historical reasons. There's not an openness to change, even if everyone thinks it's a good idea. So there's a lot. Changing a name is not. We maybe wind up doing it for, I don't know, 20% of the organizations we do branding work with. It's a big deal to change a name. But if you do, understanding where and how you use a tagline and also your abbreviation. In fact, we had a nonprofit organization we did some work with a few years ago, the Colorectal Cancer Coalition. They more often than not went by their abbreviation of C3, of which we know at least one other organization that uses that. They use the letter C and the number 3, not SEE. And the thing is, when you go out there and speak in acronyms, which again, many of us tend to do, it's hard for your audience to know who you are. Unless you're IBM or maybe UNCF, an organization that's been around for a while and has a long history, it can be hard for somebody to understand who you are by just speaking in acronyms. So we really recommend for most groups to use their full name or come up with an abbreviation that maybe is a shortened name but still using full words. And I'm happy to answer questions about that if there are any. The other pieces of messaging I just want to touch on briefly are your vision, mission, and values statements. Many organizations in a strategic planning process will rewrite or edit their vision and mission, maybe their core values. It's important to relook at those things from the lens of positioning and personality. I more often than not see vision statements that are about the organization. Over the next 5 years, we want to diversify our funding and blah, blah, blah. But a vision statement is really what you see for the world. We want to see a world where no kid goes to bed hungry, where nobody fears a cancer diagnosis, where everybody goes to bed in a warm, safe home. Right? A vision statement, we want to see a world where no animals are being mistreated. A vision statement is something that we can all sort of imagine and see ourselves in. And in fact, other organizations in your space might share that vision. But the mission is how you get that done and is your unique slice of the pie. And again, how we express these things can help create that positioning and personality and get that association, have people have that association with us. And it's important to look at these statements from an external lens and see if they are, how you might be able to tweak them to better do that. And finally, there are key messages, boilerplate and elevator pitch. Key messages are the common ideas that come across all your communications. Boilerplate is that sort of about us paragraph or two that exists everywhere. And elevator pitch may be those 2 sentences that everybody memorizes, and they start off explaining who you are and what you're at before they get into their unique program area or audience that they're working with. So even if I'm the head of development and I'm really focused on fundraising, or I'm at a school and I'm in charge of admissions and I want to, I'm really focused on why you should come to the school, we all need to start off with what the school does and what they're about, and then get into the unique sort of call to action or invitation or program. So understanding all these pieces, and not everything can do, not every single element can do everything. So it's also important to think about messaging together. Your name and tagline can't tell your entire story. Your mission statement can't tell your entire story, but your name, tagline, mission statement, boilerplate together might better explain who you are and what you're about, and be the kind of things that we should understand and see across all your communications. I want to go to the 3rd level, which is the experiential level. There's a book called Brandraising, which I'll mention again in a moment, that Sarah, our Big Duck, the president and founder of Big Duck, Sarah Durham, wrote a book called Brandraising based on our experiences here at Big Duck. It was published, I believe, in 2010. And when we did that, we really looked at the channels nonprofits use to communicate and the experiences people have of them in these 5 ways: online, in print, on air, in person, and mobile. Online is web, email, social media. In print, your newsletters, your brochures, your annual reports. On air, radio, video, podcasts. In person, events, your office, the people who work for you and represent you. And then mobile, apps or texting or, mobile advocacy programs. I think since we've published the book, some people put mobile and online together. But for some organizations, based on who they're communicating with, what their budget priorities are, what they have the resources for, mobile is still thought of as a separate element that they may not be diving as deeply into. When we think about these things, again, if we know our positioning and personality, we can use those to make decisions about what channels we use, how we use them, and how these channels come across to communicate that experience of our organization. But it's not just, again, communicating out. It is building relationships with people. And it's important for us to think about how we use communications, our brand, and then the experience of our brand through communications channels to move people up this ladder of engagement where they go from not knowing us to paying attention to becoming our biggest fans. The thing I want to mention briefly on this is if any of you have ever written a communications or marketing plan, and in that plan have written the general public down as an audience, I want you to do me a favor and find that document and delete that phrase as soon as you can, because it is impossible to reach the general public. And the unaware audience that you should be focusing on are the people that don't know you but should. We can't, as most nonprofits I know out there, we cannot afford to reach every single person, nor does every single person need to know who we are. But there are people out there, whether they are a donor, a program participant, an advocate, whomever, who don't know us but should. Those are the people we should be trying to reach, and we should be using our communications to get them to pay attention to us, build a relationship with them, become supporters, and then eventually become people who are big ambassadors and advocates. I want to just offer some brief resources and then share a last bit of ideas for you, which is if you are trying to get into branding, we certainly have a lot of resources about it on our website. Sarah published the book Brandraising, which you can easily get on Amazon. These other 2 books here, Positioning, if you're really trying to understand the concept of positioning, the idea really came out decades ago by Al Reese and Jack Trout, and this is a great book on that. And then finally, a few years ago, The Brand Idea was published, and this is a different way to think about branding. Much of it overlaps with our approach to branding. But one of the things that's interesting in The Brand Idea is a sort of deeper focus on internal communications and really how staff think about you and how to sort of more deeply engage people in that concept. So you might want to check those out. All right, so the last thing I want to do before we wrap up, and I want to invite you to chat in your response to this question: what can changing the brand really achieve? I may not have done my job. You might not think changing your brand is worth it, but if you do or you don't, that's okay. What do you think changing the brand can really achieve for a nonprofit? Chat that in, and let's see what people say.
So as we're waiting for a few responses to come in, I have one question for you, Farah, that kind of relates to this. I'm curious, when you see people start having this conversation about more intentional branding, it feels to me like that can go in two directions. One direction is, okay, what does that mean for our logos and our graphics and our color and our consistency and whatever, sort of more towards the tactical, practical side of things. And I can also imagine it really begging some bigger kind of strategic questions that kind of heads in a different direction that you almost have to answer before you can answer the tactical branding questions. I'm curious if you have any comments on that, of like, what's normal, or when should you trust your instincts to ask some of those bigger strategic questions, and when should you kind of say, wow, that's going to take us down this whole other rabbit hole, and we should just focus on the immediate things in front of us. I see small and large organizations having these questions, and what's the nature of how much you bite off?
Yeah, I mean, again, what we have seen is that that if you sometimes we get into this and we don't do a lot of deep, strategic planning, organizational development work, but we definitely touch on it. And I think that we see that come up. And if your organization's having a bigger existential question, like, well, really, are we needed in the world? What is our place? Should we be, less of an advocacy organization and more of a support organization? Those kind of questions, have to be answered first. If you want, branding is about, branding is really about your reputation and your perception. Your brand is what other people say, who other people say you are. Right? We can sort of, the process we're guiding you through with positioning and personality and using that is trying to sort of say, okay, well, let's at least put out a clear and consistent, compelling message that we hope people will experience us as, but we can't, as of yet, control people's minds and hearts. But what we can do is try and influence them and try and guide them. But if we're not clear about who we are, then no one else is ever going to be. So I think if your organization, if you start doing this work and you think it's going to be simple and it starts getting bigger, it is important to pause and answer those questions. You might also say, you know what, we need to take a few years to figure this out, so we're not going to change our brand, because what you don't want to do is change your brand 1 year, go through a whole process, and then a year or two later change it again.
Yeah.
If you're going to make significant, it's one thing to slightly tweak an image or maybe change a color. Well, I don't know, that could be a lot. If you're going to go through a big change, you don't want to do that. I would say more than at least once every 10 or 20 or more years.
Yeah.
If you're making minor tweaks, that's one thing. But if you think you're going to be going through this major change, or you're having a crisis of who we are, you need to figure that out first.
Yeah.
And we do talk a little bit about that in Brandraising, but I'm curious, has anyone chatted in what can changing the brand achieve?
Oh, we have a bunch
of
great answers here.
Oh, good. Let's hear.
So aligning everything, employees, supporters, public, etc., clarifying identity and approach, building relationships, better connection with audience, feeling like the organization really gets what it's doing. And then there's a bunch of answers about being more intentional and deliberate around programming, around messaging, around excitement, even internally, for people to be able to clearly know what they're doing, updating to a 21st century image. And I love this one from Faith: improved confidence.
We definitely see that too. Well, so we were curious about this question. We obviously have lots of opinion. As I mentioned earlier, we did a study this summer that came out called The Rebrand Effect. It's an ebook that you can download, and there's a lovely infographic with it as well. If you go to bigducknyc.com/rebrandeffect, you can give it a quick read. It's not too long, I promise. But I'm going to give you some the 5 big insights from this study. The first was that when organizations make significant changes to their brand, they change in this list that we provide, 5 or more elements. We do see a connection between change and sort of an increase in money. So within the past few years, when some of these organizations did make significant branding changes, half of them saw an increase in funds, and others maybe sort of can't tell, or there's a fear a lot of times with branding that they're going to lose money and reach less people if they go through major branding. But if you do that branding well and you do it in a thoughtful way, we are certainly seeing a connection here. The second, and as related, this is just sort of a breakdown of those numbers when it comes to fundraising. The orange being the sort of increase here, where again we're seeing an increase from individuals, donors, increase in donor retention, as well as corporate and foundation donors. A second was, and this is what many of you spoke about, rebranding does help people. We see an impact on culture. People do feel more confident. I think that was one of the answers you just mentioned, Lisa. People find it easier to talk about the organization and connect what they do to the larger world out there. It's easier to create materials because they have a starting point, whether it's a template or a new template or a new set of messages. Board members can find themselves more likely, or even staff, to want to work for an organization because they have a better sense of who it is and what it's about. Number 3, those benefits that we see with branding don't take a long time. Many people found that when they had gone through significant branding changes in the past few years, they saw those benefits already coming in, and many were expecting to see them come much sooner after that. Fourth, there were several factors. This is important to think about. And again, we spoke about strategic planning. The other thing, we're seeing a lot of groups who go through branding, there's also often shifts in leadership. If they do a significant change in their brand, that often is connected with maybe a new CEO or board chair or other senior leadership, or a new sort of approach, or either a big new program or a new approach to something. That sort of branding comes hand in hand with a sort of rethinking of the organization. And when that is happening together, the branding is more likely to stick, as opposed to an organization that, as you were sort of speaking to earlier, Lisa, goes through branding, and then all of a sudden someone new comes in or a new direction's created, and they have to rethink what they did before. And finally, we certainly found and do admit that rebranding is not a cure-all as much as we wish it was, especially when it comes to fundraising. Understanding who you are and communicating that clearly and in a way that is compelling and concise is certainly helpful. But there are other things that you need to do to be able to be competitive in today's fundraising world, and this is definitely one way to do that. So what I want to do is leave you with a few takeaways and resources, and then in our last few minutes open up to any other questions. So here are some takeaways that I want to just share with you all. First is, your brand is a system. It's not just your logo or a color or your name or even just your website. It's all of it together, with really those concepts of positioning and personality driving and guiding your brand. And finally, everyone, everything, every element is a brand ambassador, whether it's the person who answers the phone or answers the email or your Facebook page or anything that you're putting out there. All of it, the staff person, all of it represents you. And it's important to think about those ambassadors having the tools to be able to know what you're about. And I think doing trainings can be incredibly helpful, that people understand what your positioning and personality is and your messages and how to use them. Just briefly, I want to share a few resources, and I know Lisa does, and then we'll open it up to questions. Big Duck does lots of webinars with our good friends at C3 and others, as well as on our own, and we put many recordings of webinars, including a previous one on brand raising. If you want to share that with folks, on our website at bigducknyc.com/archives. We also have lots of in-person workshops coming up. I know both Lisa and I will be at the Nonprofit Technology Conference in March in Austin, so if you're going to be there, let us know. We can meet in person. Our website's bigducknyc.com. We're also on Facebook and Twitter at Big Duck, and it's really been a pleasure getting to talk to all of you. I'm going to turn it back over to Lisa and see if there are any other questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Farah. I have heard you do this before, obviously, and every single time I learn more things and it sinks in more deeply. So thank you. This was
Yay.
incredibly valuable. And thanks to everybody on the line who participated so actively and helped make this such a rich conversation. I just want to punctuate the brand as a system, which was one of your closing comments. And I think you're so right that it is not just about a logo or a color scheme or a tagline. It's really something that is lived and breathed throughout the organization. And I think you said earlier that your brand is really what other people would say about you. It's not what you want to say about you. And at C3, we really work through many different kinds of channels to help bring that to life as organizations work to build capacity and consistency and to leverage the tools at their disposal. And the reason why we were so excited to have you come share this, Farah, is because we see so many organizations and so many staff coming in looking to build a new website or to make an end of year video or whatever kind of asset they want, but they haven't yet done the reflective process of understanding their brand and understanding their messaging and understanding what they want to put out into the world that really has to inform whatever that deliverable is, from a website to a video to how they're using their social media channels or designing a campaign. And so I really do believe that it is a system. And at C3, we strongly believe that if people have done this thoughtful reflection and planning around their brand, that every other kind of communication that they do is going to be all that much better for it. So we're thrilled to have you. I also want to just mention to everyone on the line that we're doing another webinar on Thursday, January 22nd with Allison Fine. She was one of the co-authors of the Network Nonprofit along with Beth Cantor, so you might be familiar with her work from that. And she's recently released a new book called Matterness: What Fearless Leaders Know About the Power and Promise of Social Media. And I think this goes back to some of what Farah mentioned earlier about us being in an attention economy, that you're really needing to fight for the time and attention of the people that you're trying to reach. It's really noisy and chaotic out there. And your brand and consistency of brand and quality of brand obviously is one important way to do that. And Allison's book really speaks about helping people feel like they matter to each other, to the cause, to the organization, and how developing relationships between and among people can support your cause, your mission, and your organization as well. So if you're interested in joining us for that free webinar, you can register at bit.ly/Matterness webinar. It's also on the C3 site and on our social media, Facebook, Twitter, and everything else. As we reach the end of our hour, if there are any last questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, in the questions area. One question that came up is about those kind of brand guidelines, Farah, where you mentioned that if you have really documented all of this stuff, then people don't have to recreate it. It saves a lot of time and money, as well as keeps that consistency. Do you have any recommendations of where people can find examples of those brand guidelines?
If people, I can talk about what goes in brand guidelines. A lot of organizations put them, have them proprietary, though I know a few national organizations put them out on their websites, especially if they have affiliates. So like Girl Scouts or the Red Cross, they may have those available on their website. But the thing about brand guidelines I do want to say is most people, when they do brand guidelines, they think about them as style guides, and they may just have the visual side. This is our logo. This is what to do to it, not to do to it. These are our colors. These are our fonts. We think it's important in guidelines to also include the messaging, to make sure to include, this is our name, this is how we abbreviate it and how we don't abbreviate it. This is our tagline and when we use it. This is our key messages. This is our boilerplate. This is our elevator pitch. This is what goes in our email signature and what doesn't go in our email signature. This is our Microsoft Word templates and where we start margins. All of that stuff should go in brand guidelines. Unfortunately, I don't know off the top of my head one that it's out there, but I'm sure if you Google nonprofit style guideline or brand guideline, you'll find examples.
Fantastic. Claudio, you asked if this presentation is going to be provided. We will email everybody who registered for this webinar with a copy of the slides and the recording and links to some of the resources mentioned. So all of that is coming your way. No worries. Next question is, if I'm informing a client or upper management, what's a realistic timeline to establish a brand?
If you are doing it thoroughly, and sometimes this can also depend on how many chefs there are in the kitchen. I would say a safe estimate is 6 to 9 months. I have certainly seen some branding processes happen slower and some happen quicker. But I would say 6 to 12 months, 6 to 9 months, that's probably the going general rate.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Farah, so much for taking the time and sharing your expertise. And thank you to all of you who joined us on this webinar. We'll be sending out the recording, the slides, and other links shortly. And we hope to see you on C3's upcoming webinars. The next one is Allison Fine speaking about matterness. Hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon. Take care.